Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Yeager. This is the MTOM Show podcast, a production of Iowa PBS and the Market to Market TV show. To begin 2024, there were a lot of protests of farmers in Europe. Why? Why did they bring their tractors to capital cities? Why did they bring manure to throw into this protest? And what kind of an effect did that have on the European farmer? And did the American farmer see what's happening and get inspired? Did they feel sympathetic? Or is there just more that we need to know about what's going on with them? And it goes back to the word green, how the green agenda made for a very interesting year with many farmers on the other side of the ocean. We'll talk about that. We'll also further stitch together what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, how production has gone up, and what exactly that means for the rest of the world when it comes to the products made in those two countries. Matt Ammermann from StoneX. He is an expert in Eastern Europe and the Black Sea region, so we figured he'd be a good one to have this conversation with. And yes, StoneX has become, as I'll say here in just a moment, very regular on this program as we fold in another person and their insight from this large company. So we're going to talk about Europe, the green agenda, and the American farmer now on the podcast. StoneX is like become our second sponsor, it seems like, on the show. We get Mark Gold, we get Arlen Suderman, we've had Josh Linville on. Have you ever figured out how many people are now your coworkers?
I'm surprised daily by the increasing number on that, which is a good thing though, right?
Has it allowed you to be able to focus more on a very specific thing since there's somebody else that might do what you used to kind of have to do on the side?
I mean, a little bit, you would say, especially like with Arlen's team, the market intelligence side of StoneX. He's really done a really good job of picking that up and really feeding, like I'm on the risk management side. So I would be inquiring his team to create some documents or research information. So yeah, it helps. It helps the big picture for sure.
Tell me exactly what risk management then means in StoneX terms.
Sure. In StoneX terms, we're here really to help manage price risk, whether it's the farmer for this audience, the farmer directly. We all know they're always long a commodity, whether it's current, next year, 2 years in the future, they always have price risk. So we have strategies that we can implement to help manage that downside price risk that a farmer takes.
Whereas Arlen is gathering intelligence to help you make better decisions for, I'm guessing, are they called clients? Is that what you have?
Exactly. Okay. So a client would be, in this term, let's say a farmer goes from an elevator to a trader to a importer, a flour miller, basically anybody, the whole value chain that accepts price risk. That's where we would step in and do some sort of strategy to help manage that risk. So yes, Arlen's team helps feed market information, studies, reports like that to us as well.
I'm always fascinated how these companies are structured and how things go and how I know there's supposed to be separation and delineation and there's walls and there's some fire gaps to keep people separate, right?
Right. I think in today's regulatory world, yes. I'm supposed to say yes to that. But it also helps just everyone to be more efficient, kind of like you're saying as well.
Now, with Josh Linville, I've talked to him very specifically about fertilizer. I'm talking to you today about two specific areas. How did you get interested or pick up this specialty of Eastern Europe and the Black Sea region?
Yeah, so grew up on a farm in west central Minnesota. You would say a lot of the commodity brokers or risk management consultants at StoneX, at least on the agricultural side, we typically come from the farm. I think that kind of makes sense. We understand what the growing season entails and stuff like that. So definitely StoneX appealed to me for that reason. At that time, it was, I believe, FC Stone. We've been through a few changes, but at that time it was FC Stone. And yeah, so farm kid, started here doing that. And then to me, an opportunity came in the Black Sea market, kind of jumped on it and have not looked back since. And that was like almost 17 years ago. So definitely a lot of changes, not only market wise, but also in the Black Sea. It's just like incredible.
what part of West Central Minnesota and what lake is considered your home lake then?
Home lake would be, so I actually grew up in Chippewa County, which
Yep.
Candiota County is the county of like lakes in Minnesota. So if you've heard of like Lake Florida or Green Lake by Wilmer, Minnesota, that's like the lake.
I know the area. I know exactly where you're talking about. Yes.
That's good.
So then what do you then consider your home lake then?
Home lake, Green Lake.
Green Lake.
That's where my grandpa and grandma actually have a cabin on Green Lake.
Is there anybody still on the farm there?
There is, yeah. So my dad actually just retired this year. My brother is taking it over. So that transition's going on. But yeah, he's still doing it. So it's good.
Did you ever have any thoughts of joining the family?
I would say this job that I'm doing is as close as it gets to maybe farming. So I think that's as close as I've got. Definitely times where I'm like, should I be a farmer? But I think no, I'm good at where I'm at right now. It's nice that my brother's taking it over so I can still kind of go see it and participate whenever I want without maybe the hard work of it. So maybe the best of both worlds.
Your work is different. Your hard work is different. And I mean, you have to sit there and you're trying to parse information coming out of a region. And then he's kind of like the I won't call it the incubator, but the test area of you can kind of see how your thought plays out with what he's doing.
Exactly. Sometimes voice of reason sometimes comes in for sure. Because farmers always are like right to the point, blunt, which is good.
Bluntly speaking, Black Sea has been full of news the last 3 years. How again did you make that connection from farm to learning to being so involved in this arena?
Yeah, I think it just takes to kind of gain that initial respect of market players and those involved in the market. They can decipher, much like a farmer, I think, that for this audience, you can decipher maybe like a city kid very quickly from a non-city kid. Not that's bad or not, but if you just have the experience of farming, I think that just speaks. And how to get the experience of it. It just, I think when you look at the similarities between the Black Sea and think the upper Midwest, Iowa, Minnesota, Dakotas, it's very similar climate-wise, growing-wise. Like Ukraine has a good amount of sugar beet grown as well, which that's my dad and brother grow sugar beets. So a lot of just, I think the same similarities, it's just different time zone, which kind of brings a nice benefit. And one nice thing is I think StoneX was open. I mean, we're a huge global firm, so it kind of fits into the business of StoneX very well.
You mentioned geography is the same. I mean, you're almost like the same parallel from where you're at in Minnesota. Yeah. So, I mean, there's that understanding the weather. And I think that was like the first connection that maybe farmers who hadn't traveled or familiar with Ukraine of just how similar it is to the Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, Dakota type area. So when it struck and we still had grain in the fields or we had crops in the bins, and then you hear Russia taking over all these things and then shutting off access to ship. And then Russia just kind of, for lack of a better term, commandeers the grain for their own is what we see. Have I summarized it pretty accurately in what we've seen the last 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, pretty accurately. I think my biggest takeaway is how resilient the Ukraine farmer has been in the midst of what's been going on, but also the Russian farmer. Like they're equally kind of, I think, removed from like the political aspect of it. But to me, number one, Ukraine, they just continue to operate. They're now going on their third year, which I think if you throw 3 horrible years at a U.S. farmer, they might fold. Right, there might be a lot that fold and just they can't do it. But Ukraine is now going on their third year. They have a good mix of more winter crops as well as spring crops, so they kind of have that. Maybe call it diversification a little bit, but not too much. To me, the biggest thing that just stands out is just how resilient they figure it out. They don't have the collateral, they don't have the insurance schemes that the U.S. has. They are operating with virtually no insurance, no collateral, which makes me even like boggled mind even more that they're able to make it through these hard times, but they are. They're not doing very well this year. The third year around, prices aren't the best. They had the UN corridor set up. It was working well for a while. Russia stepped out. Then their exports hurt. But now they stepped in. They figured it out. The military of Ukraine kind of helped back it. And now they're actually exporting more than what they were even pre-war. So again, it's one of those things that a market economics, they always find a way to get it done. And I would just say over the past 3 years, Ukraine farmers are very rapid in finding a solution, whether it's going to the different ports in the Danube or finding roads and trains to get it out, or finally doing the port themselves. So it's good on that side. Then even on the Russian side, Russian farmers, they have a lot of sanctions in place, but I would say they're still able to get it done as well. There is a bit of land in there where it's in occupied regions. USDA, I think, is still questioning what are we going to do with this data. Obviously, Russia is more like, we'll count it. So that's obviously a huge debate on the numbers side, but both sides, both farmers are finding ways just to still kind of get it done in a very simple terms.
And those farmers aren't a part of what's going on above them, both literally and figuratively. Exactly. And so they're trying to operate with, you mentioned there's really no safety net for them. They are operating without a net even more so. Now they've just like, let's just say instead of being 2 stories off the ground, they're more like 20 stories off the ground trying to operate.
Exactly. So you would say for them, when prices are really good, it's really good for them. They have the big swings. But when prices are horrible, it's like even worse for them. So to your point, yes,
manic.
Totally agree. Yes,
you would call it.
Exactly.
Whether it's Arlen or whoever comes on to market and talks about the wheat market, or any analysts that I read, it's always this amount of wheat that is coming, and soybeans and whatever the grain is coming from this region is flooding the market, lowering the price. They're not producing more than they used to. Why does it seem like this is a bigger story now, because so much of this is on the market?
Right. Well, first off, I think on the export side, they are producing more. Russia last year produced a record crop. USDA, I believe, still is at 92, 94 million ton. Privates are at 104. So that's last year. That's fed now into new crop, like the current marketing year in Russia. So that's fed record export levels out of Russia. Ukraine, not so much, but they're still exporting near record amounts, bigger than pre-war. So to your point, there was a point where Ukraine could not export anything because the corridor was closed. Maybe they're having some issues at the ports. So they found roads or other ports to go to. Yes, that brought increased supply. But the argument is that easiest way to put it is Ukraine wheat is much like SRW, Chicago wheat. Most of Europe is like HRW wheat. Russian wheat is HRW wheat. So Ukraine wheat is typically a little lower quality. So they're always going to feed to specific Middle East, Northern Africa markets, as well as Portugal and Spain. The EU really doesn't compete with Ukraine, even in a normal market. It's just that they were using transit through Europe to kind of get there. Combine that with a lower price environment, because if you could just go look at a price of Chicago wheat, for example, prices are now below pre-war. So, of course, a farmer, when prices are lower, they always like high prices. So when prices were lower, more from the European perspective, they see all this product coming in from Ukraine, even though it's not influencing their market directly. They know it's low prices, and they find an excuse to blame the product coming in from Ukraine. So to me, it's more the narrative, the bigger picture of overall lower prices. Therefore, let's find a reason to argue and try to get more support.
Is there any WTO options for anybody to argue unfair trade practices?
I'm sure there is some there, but I think at the end of the day, they're not really there because they're not really competing with each other. I'm sure there's some like small amounts that are still competing, but from a big zoom out perspective, they're still not essentially competing any different than what it was pre-war. I mean, even beyond it a little bit, if you see all the tractors and stuff like that from going to Brussels, in France, in Germany, everywhere across the EU, that was also in regards to the fork to food argument in Europe, where they were pushing, let's say, the green agenda, where they were going to lower the pesticides, lower fertilizer usage, increase fallow land. So the government officials were trying to also push a green agenda very quickly. In the midst of lower prices, that pushes an angry farmer, because if you push a green agenda, that comes at a cost. When prices are already low, it equates to not a fun situation, which I'm sure everybody saw. So like the majority of the EU protests that you saw, it was a combination of, well, this product's coming from Ukraine. We have this green agenda. Let's try to get some additional help from an EU perspective.
So the two are tied together.
Yes, the two are tied
Okay,
together.
we're going to go back to Europe in a minute. I want to button up one last thing on the Ukraine. I thought you were going to say what the Ukrainians and the Russians are doing when the price is low is they're doing the sometimes American way, is let's just produce more because we need to compensate for the lower prices. Therefore, oversupply lowers the price.
At some point, yes, that occurs, but I think at least Russia, Ukraine are financially in the position where they can't really step out and do that much different practices. The only slight difference is they're making a switch to more oil seeds, especially in Ukraine. Ukraine has soil, exactly like think Minnesota, Dakotas, parts of Iowa. They're set up to crush sun seeds, so they favor sun seed production. They're increasing soybean seed production a little bit, so that's maybe the slight adjustment they can do from a low price environment perspective. But overall, farmers are, let's be honest, creatures of habit. They're used to kind of doing a certain rotation, so they can't really step out and change really drastically that much.
Well, that's what I was going to ask then next was, what is the change? Is there anything different? Is wheat being planted because A, it's what we know, or B, if we lose it, we don't lose as much as if we would put a more valuable, profitable crop in the ground?
Yeah, I think there's some of that. And like I said, more switches to oilseed a little bit. One big switch, if I were to take zoom out, the ethanol era in the U.S. pushed, in my opinion, Ukraine to plant more corn. So corn is definitely that, much like in the U.S., how it can yield profitability much quicker than soybeans or other products. The same thing happens in Ukraine. So, but again, they're stuck to that rotation factor. So it's not that corn on corn on corn on corn that you might see in the U.S. as much in Ukraine. But beyond adjusting, those are really the only factors that they can really do besides putting the seed in the ground and hoping that they get a good crop and somewhere else in the world has a weather scare and makes prices go up.
Sounds familiar. I think I've heard that before.
Yes, exactly.
Matt, let's continue that zoom out. Earlier this year, we had stories on our air about protests in Brussels, all these European roads with tractors coming from wherever. It first was just one country, then it became 2, 3, 4. Give me the high level first, and then let's dive in.
Yeah, so the high level, again, it just gets back to a green agenda. Like, you had government officials saying, we are going to restrict you as a farmer, whether it's what you plant, where you plant, what fertilizer, what amount of fertilizer, pesticides, different permits, livestock there were restrictions on, increased land to put fallow to increase the potential of less pollution, et cetera. And I think I think the green agenda in Europe has probably been more prevalent than in the US. So I think it's kind of been pending there for a while. And again, I think it just got to a point where you combine inflow of product coming from Ukraine, lower prices, and the farmer kind of erupted. I would say that the European farmer, I mean, from a basic perspective, it kind of seems like they know how to protest with how they kind of bring all the tractors together and manure spreaders and just all that. It's just incredible to kind of see the way they protest. And
Well, the Audubon,
big
I mean, the Audubon's always, they move quickly. They're used to high speed on their interstate system, for lack of a better term. Interstate,
yes,
I know, is not the right term. When you bring a big old tractor onto the highway, it slows things down, and the manure
yes.
is plentiful. And it's certainly, if you're not used to it, if go back to what you said, not from the farm, that smell is very pungent. And do you
Yes.
think that
Yes.
it was a successful series of protests?
I think it was. It seems like they kind of backed off and said, okay, fine, we'll kick the can down the road a little bit. We won't deal with this specifically right now. But I think it's something that I think farmers realize, like, we have to do something with the way we're doing things. But I think just that whole narrative globally is occurring. We're even having it in the U.S. So I think overall, yeah, I think it was successful. If they did nothing, I'm sure we would be looking at a much different situation. So it kind of seems like, did they win? Maybe short term, but long term, I think, again, they just kind of know that, hey, we got to change eventually or adapt some changes down the road.
Is Green Agenda more of a European Union thing, or is it country by country just adopting the same type of copy paste rules, policies that these countries want to put in place?
Yeah, I think it's more a European thing. Now, I don't know the exact specifics, but I'm going to assume that it is kind of a copy paste, that once one nation, like if France does it, well, then maybe Germany will do the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, Brussels is kind of the one that kind of drives the ship in that I'm sure most government officials, if something happens, I'm sure everyone will have to kind of adapt to the changes that are made.
I also, Spain, Portugal, I mean, I think they were in this too.
Yeah.
They had their own sets, but they're
Exactly.
removed from some of these other areas. How's the connection between all of these countries? Because a farmer in one country seems, you would think, is dramatically different, but you're making it sound like that they're a little more similar in thinking.
Yeah. I think at the core of it, yes, they operate independently. So think like how U.S. states, I mean, we can operate independently, but we can't. Again, I'm no government official. I still am confused sometimes how the U.S. operates.
So am I.
But yeah, so the European Union is more or less the same. Again, I think just from a basic perspective, yeah, they're all going to follow each other. There might be a few year lag difference there. But yeah, I agree with you. Spain, Portugal were in the mix of that as well. It's kind of one of those things. Once one nation, one country starts, it kind of catches fire. That definitely what happened with these farmer protests. Maybe also just thinking about it off the top of my head, it was winter. They weren't in the field yet. So maybe they, realized we have some free time a little bit. And now that they have to get back to work more legitly, maybe that also calmed down the actions a little bit too.
Are we to a point where we could see tractors roll into St. Paul or Des Moines or Washington, D.C. with American farmers, seeing what the European farmer has done?
This time of year, I would say no, but maybe never, because U.S. equipment is just way bigger. Probably wouldn't even fit down most of these smaller streets.
It already is slowing down in Wilmer or in Owatonna or Plymouth or wherever. Exactly. If a tractor rolls through at the wrong time, that's enough of a protest right there, whether they were intending to do it or not.
Yes, exactly.
Does the American farmer, though, can they sympathize with what the European? You talked about, the Green Agenda. That's always kind of a buzzword of in the United States that many farmers don't. They feel like they are being pressured in a direction they don't want to go. Is there sympathy that can be had by the American farmer to the European?
Oh, I think there for sure is. Yeah. I would say, at least, again, my knowledge of U.S. farmers, it seems like the younger generation is maybe more aware that, like, hey, maybe we can or maybe we should do this or that, because maybe they realize some of these practices do need to change. That's a little bit of a tough question, because I think change is always tough. Unless you're rewarded for change, it's even harder to change. So, yeah, I think there's maybe some sympathy. I think, U.S. farmers are always looking for the most efficient way, especially with these margins, these prices. They're looking at the most efficient way to get really the best money for what they're doing. So maybe just more time, more information. People realize that maybe these green agendas have a fit, but just maybe not as they currently are set up right now.
However, the American farmer does pay attention to what Europe is doing, and they will see some type of regulation that has passed and has been implemented, and they want nothing to do with it.
Right.
That hasn't changed.
No, that hasn't changed either. And unless it really finds a direct benefit to U.S. farmers, why would they do it? That's kind of the old way of saying, right?
And as we have global companies that have addresses that aren't in the United States, they might be European-based, they might be Chinese-based, they might be Brazilian-based, where their rules are going to carry over a little different, and their implementation might happen. As we have a global agriculture economy, do you see that playing a role in how some country might not have as much of a choice in this as they think?
Yeah. I would say overall, the market, the world is definitely getting smaller year by year. What happens in the U.S. might actually be led by another nation. I won't mention a specific nation, but yes, fully agree. It's going to eventually evolve to a very small world. I still would say there might be that separation where, if I again zoom out, Ukraine has a lot of big farmers that they're vertically integrated. They're publicly traded. They have anywhere from 50 to 100, 200, 400,000 hectares, not acres, hectares. Those might be easier to adapt and take those policies. Europe, not so much. You have very small farmers. In the U.S., kind of the same thing. Overall, in general, you have small individual family farms that I think aren't going to be governed by big corporate, if that makes sense. Think some of the majors in the U.S. might be the driving force, which, okay, if they're getting pressure internationally that maybe some international buyer can only buy based upon these specifics, they might flow it back to the farmers saying, okay, now we can only buy from you if X, Y, and Z. Implementation of that, I think, it's going to take time. Even just tracking, if an ethanol plant desires it to be a no-till piece of land for them to buy the corn to create the ethanol, the tracking of that, I think, is going to be maybe the biggest leap to get done. But again, if there's a reward for the farmer, they probably slowly adapt.
This was not in what I was going to talk about, but you bring up a point of interest in the show a couple of weeks ago discussing the U.S. trade rep was in front of Congress and was asked about why aren't we doing trade deals with basically Great Britain and a lot in Europe. Do you know anything about that? And to answer that, does that play into anything that you've just talked about?
I didn't listen to the specific that you're talking about, but I know, a trade deal to Europe. One of the bigger things that Europe is kind of always restricting a little bit is the GMO genes and the GMO function of the product produced in the U.S. So I think that's maybe one of the biggest kind of issues right now. That would just maybe be the biggest thing from an EU perspective. But otherwise, we export. I mean, I'm sure you're well aware of basically any market in the world we can export to. It's just that maybe the ones that desire it the most at the cheapest price buy the most.
Well, we'll send an American product wherever we can. I mean, that's what the policy has become, because I need to move, whether it is the ethanol or the soybean or the crush or the bean or whatever it is, pork loins, let's ship it somewhere. And global trade is complicated. Exactly. So I guess let's tie it back to your job then on a day-to-day basis. How much does trade ever play into understanding these issues of the Black Sea or in Europe in handling risk for a producer?
Yeah, it's big. I think we all know almost one of the first things everybody looks when they wake up is, did something geopolitically happen? Right now, that's outside of the Black Sea, but prior to maybe 2 months ago, it was always the Black Sea. It still is. I think more specifically, now that the U.S. aid got passed, I think it brings focus right back to Ukraine again, because the majority of that aid is going to Ukraine. So yeah, to me that's a huge part of it. All these geopolitical tensions, just other supply factors, weather-based risk. To me, that's the biggest risk moving forward for this upcoming year is weather and geopolitics.
Let's take the
That's
let's take the geopolitics for a moment. In 6 months, there's a deal. Not saying it would happen in Russia and Ukraine. We determined something has happened. How big of an impact is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it would be a big impact. You would have more investment, I think, fleeing to Ukraine to get them back on their feet very, very quickly. Whether there's no deal or deal, I think Ukraine and Russia both continue to export to the max. They, at least as it looks right now, production looks to be fully fine. Between Russia and Ukraine, they're going to be probably exporting the same amount, if not more, for 24-25. So the influence of the Black Sea is not going away anytime soon. But if there is a deal, yeah, it probably pushes more efficiency, more competitiveness, probably cheaper prices from the Black Sea. So ultimately, it probably pushes more of a bearish trend because you'd have more production potential in the Black Sea. Yeah, so I think, again, it's hard to say, a deal, what define a deal. I think both sides are pretty set in their ways right now. So who knows what a deal looks like in today's world. But yeah, if it were to get done, I tend to think it's more of a bearish influence on prices than anything.
And then once you repair those docks and export locations, it might further bring in some of that bear sentiment that you're referring to. Yeah.
Exactly. Because then all of a sudden it should bring hopefully better profitability, more efficiencies, better access to all the technologies, seed, fertilizer, diesel, everything that the farmers have been scrapping to get. It'll be easier to kind of produce. But yeah, now prices, that's the other function. It doesn't guarantee profitability is going to go higher, but I think just the supply function would definitely be there.
And the European, let's button that one up. French President Macron is finishing out a term. There will be a change in France. Not saying France is the only country that sets a lot of policy, but they certainly have a lot of influence in Europe when it comes to agriculture. Do we see a change there having any reduction next January, February? Do we see less tractors going to protest?
Yeah. Honestly, I don't follow the French politics in a great deal, but I would say if this green agenda, they kicked it down the road, it's going to continue to come up. And my guess is if lower prices are still in the environment, which it tends to look like that, assuming normal weather, yeah, protests will be back. In this lower environment, nobody wants to really adapt to those changes. But then you go down the line of, if we're in a higher price environment, will officials want to make those changes? They probably won't, because they want to do everything possible to make the most production. So it's kind of that equal opposite. It seems like the only time this argument comes up is when we have lower prices, so politicians can maybe think about doing it. And I would say overall, okay, in the U.S., it seems like politics change takes a while to actually get implemented. For example, like look at the biofuel policies in the U.S. They just continue to get changed, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, yeah, maybe next year there's protests, but actual change, I think it's an ongoing debate.
And this is an ongoing conversation that we could have again, and things might change in 6 months, Matt.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, Matt, I appreciate the insight. Thank you for helping fill in some gaps that some of us may have and give us something to think about. I appreciate it.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
If you have any feedback for me, hit me up in an email, markettomarket@iowapbs.org. New episodes come out each and every Tuesday. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.